All right, so you want the Trisha Paytas deep dive. Buckle up.
Oh, yeah. This one is going to be a wild ride.
You brought in a ton of stuff. We're talking YouTube transcripts, social media posts. You've even got forum discussions in here.
Yeah. You weren't kidding when you said you wanted to go deep.
We're diving deep on accusations of straight-up deception and manipulation.
Yeah. And it gets even heavier, right? Some of these accusations, they touch on things like racism and anti-Semitism.
Yeah, really heavy stuff.
It's wild, actually, when you think about it, because what's really unusual here is where all this is coming from. It's not like traditional media outlets, it's like this massive kind of crowdsourced investigation that's happening all over the internet.
Yeah, it's like everyone online suddenly became an internet detective.
Exactly.
So where do we even start with all this?
Yeah. Okay, well, at the core of it all is this question. Is Trisha Paytas intentionally deceptive? I mean, that's the big question, right?
Right.
And based on the mountain of evidence you've given me, there's definitely a pattern here of, let's say, inconsistent statements.
Yeah.
Especially when you look at what she said about her childhood, her personal relationships, that kind of thing.
Okay, so let's break down some of those inconsistencies.
Yeah.
Like one thing that pops up a lot in the source material is her whole thing about being bullied.
Yeah.
Right? So what's the deal with that?
See, that's where things get interesting because the narrative kind of shifts over time. Initially, her whole story was about being bullied for her appearance, right? How she looked. But then later on, it seems like the focus changes. She starts talking about inappropriate behavior from teachers. And it's like, hold on a second. While both things could be true, I mean, it's possible to experience both. The fact that she changes her story like that, that's what made a lot of people online, kind of raise an eyebrow.
Yeah, okay, I see what you mean.
Like, why change the story if you're telling the truth?
And it gets even more intense because then you bring in the allegations of sexual assault against a former teacher. And this is where things get really, really complicated. There's that one video, you included it in the source material. It's from that mysterious YouTube channel. Have you seen that one?
Oh, yeah, the mysterious video. Yeah, I've seen it. They really did their homework for that one.
They went deep.
They went really deep. They took her accusations, right? But then they went way beyond that, looked into everything, public records, even yearbooks. And they couldn't find anything to back up her claims.
See, that's what's so unsettling about this whole thing.
Yeah.
Because if someone is willing to make up something that serious, I mean, that's a very serious accusation, it makes you question everything else.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Like, what else are they willing to lie about to get attention or whatever they're trying to get?
Well, that's the thing, isn't it? And it really makes you think about the responsibility that comes with having a large online platform.
Totally.
If you can reach millions of people with a single post or video, you have a responsibility to be truthful.
Yeah, you're not just messing around in your bedroom anymore. You're basically broadcasting to the world.
Exactly. And when you start making serious accusations, especially against someone who might not be able to defend themselves, that's where it crosses a line.
It's not just online drama at that point. You're talking about real people's lives.
Exactly. You got it.
And this is where it gets even more convoluted, because then we haven't even gotten into the accusations of racism, anti-Semitism, even defending a convicted pedophile.
Yeah.
And you flagged some pretty disturbing stuff in the source material.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you even start to make sense of all that?
Well, I think this is where that whole thing about separating the online persona from the real person, that line gets really blurry.
Okay.
She often defends some of her behavior as just trolling.
Right, like she's just trying to be provocative or whatever.
Exactly. But when you look at the language she uses, the things she does, it's often very specifically targeted. And not in a funny ha-ha kind of way, but in a way that seems intended to hurt and marginalize certain groups.
Right, like at what point does trolling become just straight up hate speech?
Exactly. And that's where context and intent become really important to think about.
And it's not just a one-off thing either. Like you highlighted a passage from her book, The History of My Insanity, where she talks about being bullied so badly that she had to switch high schools 4 times.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one.
But then in other places, she says something totally different. It's almost like she's rewriting her past. You know what I mean?
Totally. And that's the thing. It's not just what she says, it's when she says it. So like she's said on multiple occasions very clearly that no teachers were ever involved in any inappropriate behavior or anything illegal when she was a kid.
Right.
But then later on, especially during her podcast, Frenemies, she starts talking about being sexually assaulted by multiple teachers. And it's like, hold on, how does that even add up?
Yeah, that's a huge jump. Doesn't make any sense.
It really makes you wonder if she's being genuine or if she's just trying to deflect criticism and get sympathy when it's convenient for her, like she's playing the victim.
That's a scary thought, honestly.
Yeah.
Because words have power. And when you have a platform like hers, you can't just take them back. And the impact on the people she's accusing, especially in the case of Mr. I mean, he's dead. He can't defend himself.
Exactly. And that's what's so important to remember here. This isn't just some online game. These accusations have real-world consequences for everyone involved.
Absolutely. This whole thing just highlights how blurry those lines can get between the persona you create online and the actual impact of your actions. It's a lot to think about.
It is. It's a lot to think about. It's a tangled web, that's for sure. And speaking of tangled, we got to talk about Trisha Paytas' relationship history, especially with those YouTube guys, Sean Vanderweld and Jason Nash. You've included a lot about them in your deep dive request. Like, whoa, there's a lot here.
Yeah. And it's not just the relationships themselves. It's how she puts them out there for everyone to see. It's like watching a car crash in slow motion. You know it's going to be bad, but you can't look away.
It's definitely a pattern, right? Intense, very public, lots of drama.
And usually ending in some kind of explosion.
Oh, yeah. And this is where I think that manipulation aspect we were talking about before, it really comes into play.
Okay.
Because if you look at the source material, it's full of these really emotionally charged tweets, these tearful videos, accusations being thrown around left and right, infidelity, betrayal, the whole 9 yards, and it's all happening online for millions of people to see and judge.
It's almost like she's using her platform as a weapon against these guys. And whether it's intentional or not, I mean, that's got to be incredibly damaging emotionally to be put through that in such a public way.
Exactly. And it raises these really uncomfortable questions about boundaries, you know? Like, when does sharing about your relationships cross that line into manipulation? Or even a form of emotional abuse? It's a really tricky thing to navigate, especially in this digital age where everything is so public all the time.
No, totally. And it's easy to forget that these are real people with real feelings.
Absolutely.
And speaking of things that are hard to wrap your head around, there's this whole other thing about her claiming to be vegan, a huge animal rights advocate, but then she contradicts herself constantly.
Oh, yeah, that's a big one. And that's a pattern we see with her a lot, actually. She'll be super vocal about something, take a really strong stance.
Right.
But then her actions don't always match up. Like she had that whole video, Frank P. Pita, you included that in the source material. And she talks a lot about the horrors of animal agriculture.
Right. But then there are all these instances of her eating meat, wearing leather, you know, and it's like, which one is it?
Exactly. Because it makes you wonder, is she really passionate about these causes, or is it just another way to get attention, get more views, more followers?
Right. Is it genuine, or is it all just calculated? It's really hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
But it definitely makes you question her sincerity.
Yeah, for sure. And look, I'm all for people changing their minds, evolving, whatever you want to call it. But with her, it's different, you know? It's less about evolving and more about latching on to whatever is trendy or controversial at the moment.
Oh, absolutely. And then when the criticism gets too much, she backpedals or plays the victim.
Every single time. But sometimes, and this is where things get really dark, those claims, they can have serious consequences. And I think the most disturbing example of that is her history with that convicted pedophile.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Because this is where it crosses the line for me.
Totally.
It's one thing to, like, crave attention, but to defend someone who abused a child, a 3-year-old child, that's beyond the pale.
It's beyond the pale. And the fact that she not only had a relationship with him, but then went online and defended his actions, that's, I mean, it's inexcusable.
It's horrific. And I think it really speaks to a larger pattern of behavior with her, which is this complete disregard for other people. Like, if it gets her views, if it gets her attention, she doesn't care who she hurts.
And it's not just the pedophile thing, right? There's also the way she treats her critics, the people who disagree with her.
Oh, yeah, like, she can dish it out, but she can't take it.
Exactly. And she's very quick to silence dissent.
And then, of course, we have to talk about the constantly changing labels, you know, with her sexuality, her gender identity. 1 minute she's a lesbian, the next she's bi, then she's straight, then she's claiming to be trans. It's exhausting.
It's a lot, and I get why it's so frustrating and hurtful for people in the LGBTQ community, because it feels like she's treating these identities as costumes.
Exactly. Like, she can just put them on and take them off whenever it's convenient.
It trivializes the real struggles, the discrimination that LGBTQ people face every day. And it's especially icky when you realize how much money she's made off of some of these declarations. You pointed to that one video where she came out as trans, and it's estimated she made over $8,000 from that video alone.
See, and that's what gets me. Because it's like, where is the line between genuine self-discovery and just straight-up exploitation?
Right, because it's not just about the LGBTQ community either. She's done the same thing with cultural appropriation.
Oh, yeah, wearing those traditional outfits, hairstyles, without any regard for their meaning or significance. Like, it's not a fashion show, it's someone's culture.
It's disrespectful, it's hurtful, and it just plays into this larger pattern of behavior we've been talking about, which is basically Trisha Paytas using whatever and whoever she can to get ahead.
Yeah. And it's never really about understanding or connecting with those communities. It's just about Trisha. But it's not just about her, right? Because this behavior has real-world consequences, not just for the people she's targeting, but for the people around her too. And that's what we need to talk about next, the impact on her family, her friends, even her fans. This is heavy stuff. This deep dive has been heavy, to say the least. And I think it's easy to get caught up in all the drama, the spectacle of it all, but we have to remember that this isn't just some online soap opera. These are real people's lives we're talking about. And the impact of Trisha Paytas' behavior on those around her, that's something that really stood out to me in the source material. Like, it's one thing to pick fights with random people on the internet, but it's another thing entirely when it's your family, your friends, even your own fans. And there are some pretty intense stories in here from people who've been on the receiving end of her behavior. Like, remember Daniel E. Carroll? You included a lot about him in the source material.
Yeah, Daniel's story is a tough one, for sure. And it really highlights how Paytas uses her platform to control the narrative. Like, she's very good at silencing anyone who criticizes her, making herself out to be the victim.
Yeah, explain that. Because for a long time, Daniel was a huge supporter of hers.
Well,
right?
yeah, he was like a super fan, defended her against everyone. But then when he spoke out against her political views, specifically her support of Donald Trump, everything changed.
Wait, hold on. Back up a second. Trisha Paytas was a Trump supporter. I thought that was all just a joke, like that video she made.
It's understandable that you'd think that. She's definitely tried to rewrite that part of her past.
Okay.
But if you look at the evidence, particularly this one video from 2016, she's very clearly endorsing Trump, even makes some really offensive comments about Mexican immigrants.
Wow. Okay. I did not know that. So then what happened? Why did things go south with Daniel?
Well, when that video resurfaced a few years ago, she kind of doubled down on it at first, then tried to backpedal and say it was all just a joke.
Shocker.
But Daniel wasn't buying it. He called her out on it, and she did not like that.
So what did she do?
She basically accused him of being a stalker, of harassing her, and told her fans to go after him.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and knowing her fans, they can be very passionate.
That's putting it mildly.
So, yeah, Daniel, who is autistic, by the way, was bombarded with hate, with threats. It was awful. And for him, it was especially rough because he had looked up to her for so long, he felt totally betrayed. Like, one minute you're her biggest fan, the next minute you're public enemy number one.
That's messed up.
It is. And unfortunately, this is not a one-time thing. This is a pattern with her, silencing her critics, especially when they have a legitimate point.
It's classic abuser behavior, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isolate your victim, discredit them, make yourself out to be the one who's being wronged.
Exactly. And it works even better when you have millions of followers who are ready to believe anything you say.
Yeah, the power of influence, for sure. And that's what makes this whole Trisha Paytas deep dive so fascinating and so disturbing. Because on the one hand, you have this seemingly harmless internet personality, somebody who's just trying to entertain, right? But on the other hand, you have this pattern of manipulation, of exploitation, even abuse. And it's hard to reconcile those two things.
It is. And that's the thing about the internet, right? It's easy to forget that there are real people with real feelings behind those screens. And just because someone is good at entertaining, at building a following, doesn't mean they have your best interests at heart.
It's a good reminder for all of us to be more discerning, more critical of what we see and hear online. Because the internet can be a great tool for connecting with people, for learning new things, but it can also be used to manipulate, to deceive, to cause real harm. And if we're not careful, we can easily get swept up in the drama, in the outrage, without stopping to think about the consequences.
I think that's the perfect note to end on.
Yeah, I think so too.